Hey you guys, welcome to this episode of the Outrun Show. I'm Travis.
I'm Jesse.
I'm Justin.
And we're here today to talk about what is broken with PE and how would we fix it. On this episode, and more endurance in the Outrun Show.
That was definitely not gonna be it.
That one sounded like Seinfeld.
That was Seinfeld all
That
the
was-
way.
Wait, that's not the intro song?
Yeah.
No, that sounds like... That's like...
pretty
That's,
close.
He
the-
just added the.
Boom.
And that
You
was,
just
it
added
was the same.
You
thing.
added the right, the right note. That's all.
Gee, I just
The
hope
rhythm
that
was the same.
one day, like, our comedy can be so iconic that everybody just has an impression, right? Like, I think that's when you've made it as a comedian. Everybody's got an impression of comedians.
So that's why like the past 4 presidents all have people
Right.
like doing impressions of them,
Impressions.
because presidents
Have
tend
made
to
it.
be the best comedians.
Actually, yeah, good source of right,
Of
of satire at minimum, right? Entertainment at minimum, right? Yes,
It's good. Everybody needs a laugh.
everybody needs.
But hey, speaking of government and official programs, we are talking about PE, which is, last I checked, a mandatory thing for physical education, K through 12, for like not every state, but like
Most states,
45 of them. It's required, right?
Yeah.
It's probably like one state that's.
I mean,
Just
if
like
you
that.
homeschool here, right? Didn't we just check and it's not required?
It's not regulated.
Regulated.
So like you could do something miscellaneous, and I believe that counts as your PE credits.
That's what it was for us in high school. When I went to high school I went to, because it was half days, Fridays off. Sounds like the best high school ever, because it was. You just had to write down what you did.
She's like, I mowed the yard.
Yes.
And that counted?
Not too many homeowners.
What was
in
the
high
most
school.
ridiculous one that you put up?
The most ridiculous one that I put up?
Or somebody that you know?
I mean, at that
Family
time I was,
appropriate.
yeah, I think at that time I was training Kung Fu in high school, so Wushu or Kung Fu. So even then
counts.
it was kind of, yeah, it
That's
was
legit.
definitely different to be like, all right, Trav, what did you get in? White crane style. What?
Tiger style.
White crane. Yeah, right. He's like, well, I was a tiger last week, so working through the CNC again, right? So
He's just like, whatever. I don't get paid enough.
He's like, they don't. they didn't.
They really don't.
But I did go back and apologize for high school, so it's okay. Yeah. So that being said, high school or PE for all ages, and I think there are good people out there who this is the sad story is I think there's a lot of people who love physical education and they love to be active. Maybe they love sports, or they might actually love movement and just and they want to do that for a career. So they go in and they go to school and they end up working in public schools or private schools for physical education. And I just feel like that for a lot of them, it seems like they're hamstrung for what they can do. And, it just to PE for me there was just a lot. There was some games, but just felt kind of dated. And when I went through PE, I was never super excited about it. I was happy I was moving and not in class.
Yeah.
But I was never
It's
like,
like structured recess.
woo, boy, when I wake up tomorrow, I get to go to PE. I don't think I ever had that feeling. And if I did, it was like, why is it at 7:30
To be
in the
fair, I
morning?
don't think most kids have that about most classes in school.
Right?
But here's the thing is I think PE, when I look back on it, I think I was excited for PE in that it was a break from sitting in a desk.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
But I wasn't ever excited about its content. It wasn't even up to par in that, like, sometimes you're like, oh, I'm excited for, like, history class because we're studying something that I kind of like and I find it cool and, it's a nice class. I enjoy the atmosphere, whatever it may be, right? But PE, like, it wasn't even on the honorable mentions. It was like a break, right? Like, nobody really considered it a class. They were just like, oh, we get an hour break now where we move around and there's some structure to it. But for the most part, We just don't have to sit in a desk and read a book anymore, which is kind of nice.
In many ways, for me, it felt like more rules, but now they're making rules around what I could do physically in some ways. So I was, again, excited just to be moving or playing a few games, the traditional like dodgeball or like when they try and cycle through the different like team sports. But I still just felt like there was more judgment and more ruleification or whatever of stuff. And then, yeah, the other point you make is that it really wasn't very highly valued in the academic sense, right?
Yeah.
It was like, oh, if you have a scholarship, that's entertainment. It's there to support the universities or support high school culture, and doing it isn't as equal value as actually going and studying something in like terms of literacy or something like that, right? And to be honest, ironically, like computer work back then was not held in high regard either, right? And I don't even know if that's the case now. I think people acknowledge the value of it. They're forced to because Silicon Valley has evolved so much. But I remember if you were going to go work on a computer or code or play some sort of game, but for like Oregon Trail or something like that, then that was sort of like messing around, or that was recreation. And I feel like technology and people's ambitions have grown around that K through 12 system, that older academic system as well. And they kind of gets lumped in.
Yeah, it's a class. They recognize that it's important in some capacity, but doesn't carry the same weight that your other classes might, right?
Right.
Do you get the same impression, Justin?
Yeah, my PE class was held in the same classroom, and we watched YouTube videos, like a 30 minutes.
I think okay. So yeah, break that. Was that
what?
Was that
my PE class was in high school? Yeah, so it's in a regular classroom, and we watched YouTube videos of like 80s workout things. So we did like Taibo, and that's because it was run by a teacher who was not she was like
an academic.
Counselor.
Oh,
so she's got thrown the PE class for high school, and she just made do with what she
hey,
worked out with.
You want some more money? Take these hours.
That was private school. Charter school, we did a little bit more. We went over a little bit of sex education, and we did some human anatomy
in PE.
So it's like I feel like PE
So
gets thrown all the like random stuff they have no idea what to do with, and they're just like, here, take it.
Really?
Here's some curriculum stuff, or watch YouTube if that's what you feel like doing.
No, I had like the receding hairline, super high shorts, almost as high as what I'm wearing right now, with a line, pinstriping, right? Not Lulu. They did Adidas or something.
Dude, not even.
And the high socks. Actually, I'm dressed an awful lot like a modern version of my PE teacher at the time. I do have my hair.
That was charter school. I had that guy.
Okay, you had that guy.
We were in
He had
charter
the whistle
school,
too.
Elementary. No, so Justin and I's educational background was private school, K through 3rd grade for me, and then 4th grade through 8th grade I was in a charter school. Then freshman year, it lines pretty much similar, just 1 year ahead. And then high school, first year was in a private school, and then I did a public school the last 3 years.
The last 3 years.
Justin was in a private school the entirety of his high school career.
Right.
So Justin actually has a really interesting perspective because you were all public. I was
private first.
Were you?
Yeah.
But for the lion's share, middle school through high school, were you in public?
Yeah, the earlier it wasn't public until like 8th grade. Everything up to that was private, with a little maybe a year or two in public. But yeah, it was all private before.
Interesting. So Justin has like a really good perspective of what PE looks like from a private.
But it was private. It was private. We should clarify, even though we're not. It doesn't matter that much. Mine was all private secular.
Yes.
So it was, it wasn't a religious school. Like it was like these were the kids who were supposed to be like the Indigo Children or something like that. My parents were like, you ever heard of that before? No. Well, like there's like the Chosen One. We watched Kung Pao for.
It's better than saying
Justin's.
Blue children.
Right.
It's just purple.
It's just that there was this. We started to identify in the 90s that there were some kids that had different ways of learning or different potentials, and then there was sort of this acceptance and then this private industry demand for where to send your kid if you thought that they weren't going to fit in the public system, or they had like a like a higher IQ or something like that, or maybe they have a learning disability, they need a more accommodating environment. And there were these different theories, they have like Waldorf schools and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
There were some other ways that people were experimenting with teaching kids. And so that I got pulled into some of those, which gave me Oregon Trail a lot earlier than most people. Like I came into school with Windows in the 90s. I never had to deal with monochrome, like black and green screens and stuff like that.
Goodness,
I'm pretty sure there are kids right now still using those computers. So, shout out to you, Detroit.
If you made it to this podcast on that computer, congratulations. You're already probably going to make it just fine once you get out.
Yeah.
If you somehow managed to listen to podcasts.
No, but I didn't experience that. That's
an Apple
funny.
IIe.
I had Windows, and then I dropped into 8th grade, and I stepped into a room, and they're like, and now it's computer class. I'm like, cool. So I was thinking what I was going to be doing with the desktop software, and they sit me in front of this computer. It's black with like green text, and they cover your hands, and they're like, type. And I'm like, What is this, the Dark Ages?
Do you remember the forcing of learning to type fast? That was very weird. Like having a grade that you had to type. I mean, I feel like our standard was like 80 words per minute. Was like, and it's like ridiculously fast.
That's pretty fast.
And I feel like that's what they wanted everybody to be able to do.
It's a super painful way to learn it too. Like it just seems so medieval.
Yeah, we kind of had like fun little games where like the words would fall down and you had to type the word out without messing up before it hit the bottom, and then it speed up.
That's not
they
too
had
bad.
fun inventive ways, but. Anyways,
I'm saying just give somebody like an MMORPG, right?
They'll learn
learn right away, or you'll die. Oh gosh!
But
all right,
for PE, I feel like PE was very similar to how computer or tech class was in the 90s, and that it was, like you were saying, it was this kind of like oddball class that they were like, we think it's important, we'll test pilot it, except the difference is PE's been around since the 19th century in America.
Right.
And how much difference do we see now in a tech class from the 90s? Like, our sister, who's 15 years younger than us, gets an iPad from school the first day she starts. Right?
Yes.
We had a computer room. And that's part of that is just technological advances. But another thing is that the schools now recognize how important and impactful it is, and they invest proper funds into it, right? Where now every student has an iPad that they take home to do their schoolwork. The same has not been applied to PE, and we've seen, in fact, if we've seen any changes in PE, they are glacial at best. They've happened over decades, multiple decades, rather than the difference of 10 years, right?
Yeah, you have sport early on, which is very participatory. Like, everyone's involved, even in pro teams. It wouldn't have been that hard to get on, like, the Green Bay Packers or something like that. And you, at one point, early on, right? So, and then you've got, like... I went to Hot Springs, Arkansas, and they have this place that's called like the Bathhouse Road or something like that. And it's where people used to go. They're like basically spas from like 1920. And like, I don't know, like I guess Al Capone and like Teddy Roosevelt and folks like that might be there. So imagine that's that scenario. And they had a gymnasium because people would go there and they would train, or they'd do rehab, or they'd work on their bodies and they'd get in health. Like you were going to go there, you're going to drink the hot springs, you're going to soak in the different spas, and then you were gonna get fit.
Come out a healthier
right.
man.
And I walked in this gymnasium, and it was so entertaining because it's everything you imagine. It was like a pommel horse, and the rings were there, and they weren't gymnastics rings; they were just the rings, right? And they had those clubs that they would do different rotations, movement patterns with, and things like that. And I was like, why did we get away from this? This is amazing. And then the next imagery I sort of have is sort of that like. JFK's like fitness challenge and standard stuff that would go through, where they have all these like, these boys out with like, again, this is the
like
generation
presidential fitness,
right? And they're wearing those same
JFK.
shorts. So I'm pretty sure those guys became the PE teachers,
the ones who aced those tests, and still had the shorts, just carrying it all the way into the next century. And then we go from that to like, some odd combination of funding. Let's not pick on people with dodgeball, and I think most of it's probably economic, right? It's just like schools run low on funding. They have to put these PE classes in places, and there's less value placed on them. And then sports teams come in, and their popularity drives those programs, which makes them very dominant. And then you're left with sort of no room for the general mover. You've just got a bunch of people being primed for sports teams so they can get college scholarships and support the sports
the
industry.
Big sport. We
Yeah.
can call it big sport.
Big sport.
Big sport.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying? Like that.
I like it.
So that's the way I really just felt. Was like I don't want to be in that. Like it's fun, even though I really like Pizza Hut blacktop like basketballs. You guys know that used to be a PE incentive. You ever heard of that incentive before?
No.
So if you read enough books,
Oh yeah.
then you go to Pizza Hut with the thing. You get the personal pan pizza, and you can
Yep.
stack them. Then Reebok gave you this like blacktop basketball.
Oh,
which
didn't
was
know
out-
that you got.
You get a
cool
basketball.
prize
Like
like
the
Yeah, I
that.
used to
I
be
do
able to get a
remember doing
basketball.
that though.
Yeah, shout out if you got one of those basketballs. I got one off eBay, but it wouldn't stay inflated, so I threw it away.
Yeah, I feel like though, so PE originally, right? Like if we track physical education all the way back to its roots, we go all the way back to, Greece and, your ancient like Mediterranean cities where really they were trying to train young boys to be athletic and fit for the army, right? Or for the military because they were all military states.
Mhm.
We'll ignore like the long history of PE, but when it comes to America, the concept is still pretty similar, right? And the gym that you saw was all about like just being fit. So you see a lot of like obstacle courses, you see a lot of like bars and monkey bars and climbing apparatuses. And
Very
now
generalist.
for a generalist movement
Yeah.
that of a person that'll go into the military, right? When JFK did his like
Challenge?
PE, yeah, it was
Yeah, it
like
was some challenge, I
his
remember.
initiative, we'll call it.
Yeah.
That's like coming off the tail ends of and the winds of World War II, right? So we're
Yeah.
a little nervous about big conflict now and having to draft a bunch of young men who may or may not be, because at JFK's time he was worried about young adults being fat, right, and obese, and so that's why he does this initiative. And now he's like, well, we need people to be healthy. I think I like to think, I never met JFK, obviously,
Mhm.
but I like to think it was a genuine care and not just because, well, if we draft a bunch of obese people into the military, that definitely doesn't help the military, right? So the shift goes from training for military or training for a generalist possibility of military, and then it shifts into training for a sport. But never has PE hit a point yet where it's training for the individual's actual health.
Right.
That's what I've noticed, right? And in my history of PE, I've had some great PE teachers. I've had some remarkably mediocre PE teachers. I haven't had like a bad one, if I'm being honest.
Mhm.
But my bar may just be set really low because of it
Yeah.
was never given.
Yeah, no,
the
I had
same
great and
funds.
passionate PE teachers, and this also like this idea of shifting from this isn't the idea of being a generalist and fit is older, but if you think about like Da Vinci and his what's the art
Vitruvian Man.
yes,
Yeah.
correct, and the idea that
I was
the
just gonna
optimal
put
person
that
has these sort of like evenly distributed proportions and whatnot, but then if you look at sports, what they've selected against is that people for particular sports have very specific body types that are unique
Yep.
to biases on that sport. So if you go back to Green Bay Packers, 50, 60 further years ago, you've got this generalist guy out here doing things. And now a lineman, you'd be like, that's a lineman. That's a wide receiver. Like you'll be able to
So
call
different.
out them by those shapes. And I guess what we're feel like we're missing is something that's a little more general and underneath that, that equips people to have a positive relationship with movement. And I always just had to look outside for that. It was either if you're in PE, you're in sport, or you're fit, kind of. But you couldn't find your destiny there, even though a lot of those teachers were, like you were saying, really motivated. And also, again, the reasoning. If we look back, if you watch, what is it, Back to the Future, where the guy, where Marty goes back in time and he's like jogging or something, and the person's like, "You run? Like, why do you run?" I can't remember if that's Back to the Future 3 or whatnot. But they were sort of making fun of this idea of like running to be fit, and that was such a foreign concept. Like, why would you run? Just like take a horse or sit or something. I can't remember. There's like, I have to like share the scene or something. But it's just like this shift in the need to be sort of fit has come out of the sort of, war on hunger that comes around and gives us really easy calories, right? So we start the war on hunger, and you just get calories and processed foods dumped into everything. So now we don't have starvation as much of a problem as we have the result of low quality calories in everyone's diet, and kids and everybody. And now fitness has to matter again in a way that it hasn't before, because we haven't had to battle
The surplus of
right
processed foods that we have today.
leads to the surplus of calories that we have to deal with, right? So it's an odd kind of affluence. So we were talking about this and some of our own programs, and parkour is awesome. We feel like it is the answer to what so many people need. And if it's a fit for you, you know it, you fall in love with it with just a little bit of exposure. However, if I'm going to be selfish about this situation, like I have a daughter, she's 9, and now we're going through COVID Palooza 2020, and she is being homeschooled, and she is doing parkour. She does parkour classes here, but I still have that understanding that I want her to have a generalist exposure to movement. Like she's not a big team sport kid or whatnot. So we were thinking, how do we solve this problem for kids who are staying? And then we started thinking about our own PE program and how we would do that and what the things are that we would change. So, one of those things for me just as a parent is to know, okay, if I put her in this, she's not going to have huge gaps in her movement education per se, right?
Yeah.
Like what are the major things that we feel like are needed that needs to be carried through in a generalist approach to movement? Because parkour is, like martial arts is about combatives, right? Fighting people, or dance is like music. Parkour is obstacles, but that's not every way we move and the only way you can move, and we acknowledge that. So what are some of the things that we would want to fill in a generalist movement for kids, right? That would be good to include in programs.
Well, starting off, I would say that there's the idea that throwing and catching is inherently sport related, right? The only exposure to throwing and catching that you get in a PE class has to do with sport, right? And the truth is, very few people want to just throw a ball around and talk about like, well, this is how your glenohumeral joint articulates when you throw a ball, and this is why it's cool that your scapular wing can right? Like nobody wants to really hear that. So kids need to have some sort of engagement with throwing or object manipulation that's not sports specific, because some kids, certainly by middle school, I was already set that I was not a sport athlete. Right?
Team sport.
Teams. Yeah. Well, yeah.
Or even like
that's what I mean when I say
anything,
sport.
right?
Like, yeah, I guess I wouldn't. Parkour is a sport. You're right, but I wouldn't.
You were in a big
I
sport.
wouldn't lump it in there. Big sport. Yeah.
Big
But the
sport.
big,
I
All right, you guys,
It
we're
sounds
out
like it's a
here.
negative.
We're not hating on big sport, but we got our eye on you.
Watch out.
Watch out. We know you're the latest conspiracy.
Yeah, we can start a sport conspiracy.
Big sport conspiracy.
We'll film a YouTube video. It'll get a hit.
Easy to believe.
But anyways, so when we had a throwing sport or something like that, I was never engaged. I can only talk about from my own perspective because I don't have a child, right?
Mm-hmm.
But from my perspective, they'd be like, oh, we're doing baseball. And I'd be like, I don't like baseball. But obviously, throwing and catching are huge, important factors of your physical health that you need to be able to do. And so I would just disconnect. I would still participate, of course. I was never that kid. But I would never enjoy it. So if I had to inject something into a PE program, it would be throwing and catching, object manipulation that is not sports specific.
Mm-hmm. General, yeah. So like catching and throwing that, is odd objects. So what I really think the direction we're going with things is like and I just want to cut to the chase somewhat on those modalities. Sport, again, became very specific, right? We started designing a ball that's for a game, and we can identify those things. Like if you see a baseball, like, that's a baseball, that's a basketball, that's a football. And you throw anything else in those sports, and people are going to be like, what? I mean, there's even concern about the degree to which pressure, footballs are pressurized in American football, right?
Patriots.
Right. So you've got all of that. But we're just talking about hand-eye coordination and general, like where would you put yourself and position yourself when you're catching and throwing. And I think that a lot of this sort of comes back to if you're going to train generalist human modalities or ways of movement, then you must look at the way that we evolved to work with objects, right? Mm-hmm. So we cover a ton of that in parkour. Hanging, brachiation, awesome. Jumping, crawling, like the ability to work on uneven surfaces, all these great things that we learn skills for. But we really are born to throw. And we are born to throw even in many ways asymmetrically, right? Meaning one side of the body. And And we are thought to be plains people who did really well, with our atlatls and our spears chucking stuff. Whereas when I went to school for anthropology, we would talk about the physical differences between Homo sapiens and Neanderthal. And one of the things those guys had, they had shorter, stubbier arms, and they always dealt like thrusting damage, right? And they would always have like, we get to the one arm would always be one that like had a bunch of like damage on the bones, and the other would have like, or the same camera would have, or like the muscles or the bone would be very developed, indicating they used that for thrusting, right? And they were not awesome throwers, or they probably could, but not to the degree that the Homo sapiens could. We were chuckers. We could throw some stuff. And long arms that worked a lot like the atlatl, right? If you're not familiar with what an atlatl is, it's like a lever.
It's literally like your arm.
A stick.
But a stick.
It's like if you had one more joint.
If you had one more joint, exactly. Yeah. So they're just working on the physics right up the arm, and they huck it. Look them up. They're super cool. And if you remember, actually, there was a TV series, if anyone remembers, during the paleo... when paleo blew up, Rob Wolf had a podcast.
Oh, yeah, he was on the like surviving, whatever that was,
and he killed an elk with an atlatl.
Yeah,
One-shotted an elk with an atlatl, and the guy who was the historian on the show or whatever was like, "You may be the first, human in modern times to actually in the wild land an elk." He was on like day 4 of the show, and they were supposed to live off what they killed and stuff like that. It's part of the whole paleo experience. They're trying to make it reality TV, and then he lands it, and then they get to eat, and it's just like, okay. We obviously have some bias towards these modalities. Super cool. Lifting and pulling and pushing and those sorts of object manipulation, we have strong trunks. And I think pushing and pulling is definitely something with our backs and our legs and our glutes that we want to leverage, and at least understand and have a relationship with. When you're a kid, starting to develop those patterns and understand how to be strong underneath something when everything is so much bigger than you. So this push-pull, right? There's this push-pull, catch throw complements all the parkour modalities, which just has to do with the environment so well that to just have a general understanding of them, and then the collaboration of working with a team is the other thing that we would bring out and into. So on the object manipulation side, I would say that what we are looking to do is closer to a Flintstones Junior strongman sort of thing, but for kids, and further away from team sports and a CrossFit Kids or something like that, right? So you had a good experience with team sports, Justin.
I did.
You did. Well, it's time for you to talk about the value of teams.
The value of teams. I think it's good to depend on each other. I think that's an important lesson in life, to learn that dependency isn't something that you can escape from, or necessarily that you have to escape from. Like that responsibility for taking, ownership over a play or a pass or, defense. I think that's good for kids to learn, definitely, and to help and to, rely on other students. So,
but you guys, your mom wanted you in team sports for that reason, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Why?
Yeah, that was the reasoning, at least, that she vocally gave us.
Yeah, we have to go and ask her.
She would be an interesting one to have on.
Yes. When we start doing guests, definitely top of the list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, I think that if we look at what PE is missing, PE, I think, does a fine job of trying. They certainly try to inject teamwork. In fact, it's one of the most annoying things when you go to a PE class and you're like, all right, guys, we have a team game today. You're like, all right, fine, right? Because then it feels like, oh, I'm going to get sorted with Justin, who sucks at kickball, but I'm going to have to carry the team, right? But that's super important, to have that sort of teamwork of knowing Justin's not good at kickball. I may be great at kickball, so I'm going to have to balance out his flaws. The problem is they're always done as big sport.
Mm-hmm.
They're never done as what's an actual true team game that allows Justin, who's maybe not good at kicking, but good at other physical aspects,
or even
for him to shine.
Well, it's always uneven. Like, you always have someone who's really good at basketball, and you don't usually have an equal amount of those kids. So I feel like when you do those team sports, there's always you're always fighting over one or two kids to be on your team, and that usually takes up so much drama in figuring out the teams. and then the rest of the game is just who got the best person.
Mm-hmm.
Where I feel like if we just pick something more abstract and something that isn't solidified on TV, everyone might be, or we might have a more even playing ground where everyone's
or even
starting
if you
at
just
something.
you just look at parkour, because one of the things that when we were coming up with what the programming would be for our answer to this was picking out the good things, like what we loved about, even though we say we're individualistic, that's just an American thing for sure. Even though we say we're individualistic, we focus on the individual, but we're not directly competitive. We do play games in class every so often, and one of those games is a game in which we are trying to evacuate sort of people from a scenario where there's a flood, right? We're trying to get to a chopper, and the chopper is just a place on high ground in the gym, and then they're passing this tire, which, because when we came up with the game 7 years ago, we didn't have, it was right during we had a flood in the gym.
A flood.
We had a flood in the gym, and that was on our minds, and so we're like, okay, well, let's make a game out of this. We didn't bring kids in when there was a flood. It was after.
Point that out. I was
right,
like,
I'm
no,
going to bring it,
they
right,
didn't
exactly.
actually,
It was with these children's hands that we cleaned the gym. So the idea was that you had to evacuate, but there are rules about the evacuation. You have a tire, and you're passing it to each other, and the person can't travel with the tire, so you have to move around each other and pass the tire to each other in groups of like 4 to 6. But it's like the floor is lava, so you can't get on the floor. You're still having to employ your parkour skills to change elevation and balance as you hold and move something. But what we found was that the kids who had good parkour skills, who had been around for a while, and then could work with each other, it only took a few times for them to just annihilate any new groups, right? Like their ability to communicate and collaborate and jump and hop around each other was like if goats could perform rescue missions. We just noticed that change, and that parkour had the potential to also be not necessarily a team sport, but collaborative in that way. Yeah. And so that's one of the things we want to double down on, is sort of like take a small group, and this is, we want to run this experiment. We're slowly like dripping in what the experiment is for our version of it, is take a cohort of kids and over a period of time take them from maybe kids who can't communicate super well or haven't learned those team skills or haven't done it with a group here, and then at the end of the experiment they're just like clipping along in ways that would otherwise be unheard of, because their unspoken communication and their ability to collaborate and read each other to accomplish a task and a goal is very high. And I think that's a value that is non-individualistic, that also team sports, force, because you can't have a team that doesn't communicate. It just looks like a mess, right? In any of the team sports that they play against each other.
It's true. It's actually like most of the like elementary kids sports is literally just a bunch of children running around and parents
hilarious
yelling
at each other. Yeah.
In fact, there's a great clip, if you can find it, Colin, you might have to link it up, of a little sports team, like little football, like a whole football team, and there's a banner, and the kids are supposed to run, through the banner. I love it. I love this video. And there's this a whole herd of them, of these little kids in their football gear, and they're supposed to run through the banner, and they see the banner and they run around it, and the coach goes, and you can see him on the side, he's like through the banner, he's pointing at it. The kids have like passed around this group of like people holding the banner, and these ones in the back are like, oh, through the banner, so they run backwards towards the banner, like I'm supposed to run through the banner, and then the other group hears the coach yelling through the banner, so they like run into each other, and it's just a mess. It's just so awful. And the coach, at the end of the clip, you see the coach grab his hat,
chuck it on the ground.
It's so hilarious. But a lot of the times, getting kids to work together or communicate or understand the plan is a lot like that. And in a traditional sport, that can be super hard when you have star athletes who rise to the top. And in a traditional sport, everybody relies on that star athlete, right? If you have one basketball player who's awesome, everybody's going to field him the ball and he's going to drain threes for the entire game. That's teamwork to a degree, but it's not highlighting other athletes' strengths. I may not be good at draining threes, but maybe I can dunk. We have no clue unless I get the ball under the net. I can't dunk, by the way, but I wish I could, right? But we wouldn't know that if I didn't ever get the chance to explore it. So where I think parkour really rises to the top on that is that you can have collaborative games that allow people to diversify their strengths. Some kid may be very good at climbing, but not good at jumping. And if you have a climbing intensive section in the Floods and Babies game that we described there.
Yeah, that game's called Floods and Babies.
We call it Floods and Babies because
you're saving the baby.
And you can't run with the baby because you might trip.
Right, and originally
that's why
people were throwing the baby, or they were throwing the tire, and I was like, the tire is a baby, you can't throw a baby. You can't throw it.
You can't throw a baby.
Right.
In fact, originally I think you could actually move with the tire, and then we decided that no, it's a baby and you don't want to wake it up.
Right.
And so you have to stand still and hand off the baby gently. But anyways, in that game, you may have somebody who's really good at climbing and somebody who's really good at jumping. So your climber maybe hangs, someone hands the baby, and they're hanging there from the bar, one arm, and the jumper jumps ahead and around, and then the handoff happens, right? But that allows us, on the three of us, if we were to play a game, it allows each of us to have a highlighted skill that comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no star athlete. Sometimes there are obviously better athletes than others, but they still have to rely on others because they can't carry the tire to the end.
And others still have to get there. Lots of times we have high-level kids get put in with a more generalist group, and you're still moving. You still have to move the entire team along. Yep. Like, it's not, you don't get, it doesn't matter. It's like the guy gets all the other side. It doesn't matter. He can't go there with the tire, and he can't, that's just one example of one game. But one of the things that stands out with parkour, too, is the variability of the environment, because the environment changes so much. The sports work very hard to control consistent environments in order for the specializations to work, even to the point where like track is like the ground material must be this and then your shoes can be that.
Yep. Yeah, track is depending on your event, your spikes can't be longer than a certain length,
and then everybody else is,
what is it, a half, quarter inch I think was your max spike.
Pretty long now.
I think it's quarter inch. I mean, long for a spike that goes on your foot. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you're right. Like even the equipment that you have to use is highly regulated in sports, and it has to be that way. I mean, we're not bashing that.
If you take that potential degree of variability in the environment, then it becomes more generalist, and you drive down the specialization of the character involved, right? Mm-hmm. So we take that environment, and anything. I would argue anything is like this, that where you just have we have a broad diversity of potential, environments and grounds. Now, the only thing that we haven't been able to do that I think really should be called out as something that's really special, and maybe at one point we may be able to solve for this too, is that I think swimming is involved in the need for a generalist mover. I think swimming goes up there too.
I think it does. I'm a fine swimmer. Humans were meant for water. I don't care.
That's a specialization.
I don't care what you say. Drop anybody in the middle of the ocean, they'll tell you in the first 10 minutes, I'm not meant to be here. But yeah, I mean, swimming through lakes and rivers and, those sorts of things are certainly something we evolved to do, or at least evolved to
survive.
Tolerate.
Yeah, skills and tolerate.
To tolerate,
survive, right?
I
don't know.
I think that is, I mean, think about it. Like has Nova been in swimming lessons?
Or we've put her in swimming lessons.
Yeah, and that's like a thing that you should do when you have kids. I know that when I have kids, if I have kids, that'll be something I'll do very early on. Our sister was putting, and so I do think it is a generalist thing that you need to at least know. Is it something you need to master? I would argue
specialize
no.
in. Yeah, probably not.
But certainly something you need to be exposed to
as a general survival skill, at least.
Or just it's also nice.
Yeah, enjoyable.
It's refreshing.
Okay, so basically, you've got these different modalities. You've got the push pull. You've got the toss. You've got the things. You toss and throw, and then you have the object manipulation, and then you have the ability to collaborate as a team member, communicate with others through movement, and apply our parkour skills that way. These are all things that we sprinkle in, but it's usually like 5 to 10% of the curriculum in general curriculum, and then the majority is the focus on skills, like specific parkour skills to take that individual to be able to do more in the realm of parkour. Now, I think so. Basically, what we decided to do was partially selfish, but I really felt like it would be great to be able to support kids who are homeschooled. They've been answering. A lot of people have said to us, "Oh, we're going to have an earlier morning program or something like that." I think parkour gyms can do this, so we decided to come up with this program. We're calling it Outrun PE, and that is what is going to, sort of fill in some of those potential generalist gaps You're not going to be the same as classes where they're focusing on those specific parkour skills, but they will take those parkour skills and apply them in more generalist terms with teams and include those other sort of like mini strongmen sort of elements and some of these more primal movement skills, which is going to be a super fun experiment. And then we'll try and take this group of kids and then move them through over a series of months into essentially what would be like a parkour team, for lack of a better term on that. And so that's really awesome. This is what we're hoping will be sort of our answer to fixing some of the things that we worked on earlier on in,
or just the things that we had to discover as adults on our own that I felt I should have been at least introduced to in 11 years, I didn't take it senior, 12 or 11 years of physical education. I did 11 years of physical education, and never once was I shown like how to get on top of like a bar, like a thing. I was never shown climbing, right? I was never shown any sort of hanging or swinging mechanics. I was never taught any sort of inversions like rolling or cartwheels or handstands. In fact, most of the time, people are putting their kids in other club sports to fill these gaps, right?
Right.
Almost, it's like a rite of passage for like a young girl to have gone through a gymnastics program.
Mm-hmm.
I think part of that is cultural, but also because parents are like, oh yeah, she rolls all over the place. That must be a gymnastics thing. And I'm like, no, that's just a human thing.
Correct.
Rolling
Absolutely.
all over the place and kids climbing on things, that doesn't make them a gymnast. It doesn't make them any sports. It just makes them human.
Yeah.
Right?
And the humanity.
And I felt like my humanity was never nurtured
Addressed.
in a PE
Right.
class. And so now we have the opportunity, being adults who have a facility, who work with kids, to fill the gaps that the Department of Education, not getting into politics, but doesn't seem to prioritize. Right? Now we can fill that gap with our own program, with Outrun PE, and we can fill the gap that there are kids out there. If you're a big sport kid, phenomenal. Go for it.
Yeah.
Because I love nothing more than watching like highlights of sports plays. I'll never watch a whole game, but I'll watch highlights.
Fans don't even watch the whole game.
Yeah, right. But I love watching highlights and watching athletes, because athletes are athletes regardless of the sport, and I could recognize talent, right? And I'm like, oh, that's so cool. I love watching that. So if you're a big sport, go. You do you. If you're not big sport, like the rest of us, then your time to shine is going to be in the Outrun PE program.
Right.
Your time to nurture your own physical education and your skills and your hobbies around physically and movement, you're just not going to get that in a traditional PE class.
And I want to say that the proof is in the pudding. I'm not really sure where that came from.
Midwest,
maybe there was
probably.
a Midwest pudding competition. I'm sure that was taken from. Is that
It's always the Midwest.
we're not trying to like take sports away or just have an antagonistic approach to sports, but
Quite the opposite.
But it's quite the opposite. One of the things that we notice in big sport is that the pursuit of that sport doesn't usually go into adulthood.
No.
We're adults here. I'm nearing 4 decades, and you guys are well into when you should have normal jobs, but you don't, slackers. And we still do what we talk about. We walk the talk. And so this is a solution that's coming from a legacy of movers who never stopped, right? Who found their passion and just didn't quit the whole way through, right? Survived many quickenings all the way through and still do it. And then we're saying, this is the type of stuff we would have wanted. And we have experimented with it. So right now you're working with Jesse, you have been over the past year or two working with the school district to sort of work with groups of kids on this.
5 years now,
So
actually.
this isn't coming from a group of people who are just like, well, I wonder what we could come up with. We've got, over a decade of experience in training and working with groups of kids, plus also collaborating with school districts and United Way and some other nonprofits and teams who've come in to try and balance out their skills as well.
Yeah.
So we're not unfamiliar with working with this age group for this intention. And we are a free market solution, which means people selected us. They did not. This is not so we just didn't have a bunch of money. We had to fight for everything that we were able to build. Coming and saying, this is what we think the next step is, the right answer is for it.
Yeah, no, I think this has been brewing on our minds for probably, ever since we really opened a gym,
Yes.
right? It's been a need that we've known we've wanted to fill, and now we have the opportunity to do it, which is really amazing. And I'm super excited to see it go off. I'm really excited to see what it becomes. I think that, again, if you're a big sport kid, we're not trying to steal anybody from sports. If somebody loves football, I want them to pursue that because I want people to pursue their passions. But what I want is when football inevitably leaves you high and dry and broken, you are still a human. And I hope you loved every second of playing football, even the painful, sweaty,
injuries,
recovery processes.
Right.
But I hope that when you come out of that sport, you recognize that movement can still be a part of your life. And for some people, they just won't ever do the sport part of movement, right? It's like movement should extend with you from life or from birth to death.
Well, it does, right? You can't escape, right?
You're right.
So
yeah, but you lie to yourself about it all the time.
yeah, and you forget that it's what your body's designed to do.
Exactly.
You forget
Movement
that
is like
moving from your car to your house is still movement, and if that's the only movement that you're getting, because you can't do football anymore. Yeah,
And
if you do the
football's just a window of time in there.
Yeah.
And that's a great time for you, I hope. But when that time ends, movement still exists with you.
It's
right?
true.
Yep.
And so Outrun PE is trying to equip you with the skills and the knowledge, really,
foundation.
the foundation that when you leave those sports specific modalities, you're like, you know what? I can't get hit by a 280 pound
anymore. No way.
Muscle
do it
piece of meat anymore.
10
I
years
could.
ago.
I can't do it now.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty young. But when you're like, I'm not willing to accept that risk anymore, I hope you know that hanging, climbing, playing with your children, throwing and catching,
It's gonna matter.
is still there for you,
Yeah.
and it's still something you can do. And I hope that if I had an Outrun PE as a middle schooler or an elementary kid, that I would look back and I'd be like, oh yeah, I totally know about parkour and all of the benefits that it can provide for me for the entirety of my life.
Yeah, and to double down on that, it's insurance against ourselves because we typically aren't throwing, catching, and parkour or moving objects around.
It's true.
And even if you do basketball, you're not moving objects around. You're not pushing. Even if you're not doing parkour, you're still not pushing or pulling. You push people, pull people
Or
a little
climbing.
bit, right? You're not climbing. So some of these other elements that are in there, or if you're doing golf, you're not doing a team sport. I mean, maybe you're playing with a group of people and your score is cumulative or something like that, but you're not communicating in that same way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's that. Also, I want to take this opportunity, since I think that at this point, hopefully parents we still have some parents in there listening, and just anybody in general. And I believe in depth of movement, just like depth of any other domain that you would study. And I think at that fundamental level is strength and fitness. Okay. And I think above that is sport. And that's, basically specific skills that you're working towards and you're playing. And we see people become interested in those two things as they get older, but usually they're just going to the gym to try and stay just healthy enough to survive. Or maybe at best they're playing some pickup basketball and complaining about their knees a little bit, right? Or they're just sitting there, like you earlier were saying, hey, in PE we just pulled in YouTube and watched YouTube, and I was thinking to myself, well, that was actually pretty good preparation for what most adults do in relationship to physical activity.
Oh yeah, there's no shade against her.
Just go to a bar
That's
and
what
you
she did.
stare at other people moving. You've got 1,000, not 1,000, you got 10, 20, 30, maybe 40,000 people in a bowl, and 40 of them are moving.
I mean, that's definitely my biggest gripe, is that I just don't like watching sports because it's watching people do things that I could just go do.
You want to do it.
I just want to do it.
But this
Except
is
for the getting hit part.
Yes, well, I always liked avoiding getting hit. That was my entire goal in football.
That's true, actually. That is part of the...
So the difference between us and people who may not be a fit is that we want to do it. And I had a student tell me this yesterday, and we were talking about video games, and I was like, well, yeah, we all play a lot of video games, and we love it, and we play the games. And they're like, I don't know if I could like video games because I always looked at that stuff, and I actually want to do it. And I was like, if you have that feeling, like where you don't just want to watch, you want to participate, that is with what we do. That's cultural synergy.
That's the exact reason we don't play FIFA.
That is the exact reason that I play video games that are like have dragons and magic because I literally can't. So there's no way for me to be like, I want to cast spells and fight a dragon.
Cast a spell.
I just can't. Like the universe is like, sorry, Jesse, there's no dragons for you to slay. And even if there were, you're horribly ill prepared.
Right. That's why Nova has that little lizard. She thinks it's a dragon. Yeah.
That is a pretty cute lizard,
leopard
I'm not going to lie. Lizards aren't really something
I know. It is cute.
It's pretty cute.
Blew my mind how cute that lizard is. And so then I believe one step deeper are the movement disciplines. And that is because they are about those sort of primal aspects of humanity. They go very deep. Sport and play like that does go deep as well as a generalist thing. But they meet those needs, but they take it further. But martial arts, combatives, dance, relationship with music, parkour, relationship with your environment. And I think those movement disciplines are the deepest level. And that's why I think many adults and kids, you need that foundation for that. If you've never, explored, that kid loves to throw stuff. Maybe they should spend a little more time on sports like that, right? Or these kids over here, they love to kick stuff. Okay, try some martial arts, right? It's like...
It's always kicking me.
Yeah, exactly. You'll see, that one's a kicker right there. So they get those opportunities as well. And if you don't explore that and have that sort of just well-rounded, you're betraying yourself and you're missing an opportunity to understand something that you could potentially love and explore. And we hope that just doubles down on sort of an interest in what we do in parkour, because you don't feel like you're over-specialized again, that concept of creating some insurance for movement insurance, right? But that's just what we're here to do is, answer the call of people who are just want to battle the boring and find something that's different. So I'm super excited about this experiment, and you guys can hit us up if you have questions on it. But I mean, that's the next step is we gotta walk the talk. We don't like just coming up and like talking a bunch of junk and then not doing something. So when the conversation came up and the idea came up, we're like, look, we have to talk about the why more, and then actually, put some effort into this and get it done. So our team's working on it, and we're just super excited and ready to go. And I've got some skin in the game, like, because I'm throwing my daughter in it. Like, this is made for her, right? Exactly. So it's not just a random experiment. I'm trying to solve my own problems here.
Or just provide a solution for a problem that hasn't arisen yet, right? Nova is very active. Mm-hmm. She's very energetic and exuberant.
Yeah, she's definitely an exuberant mover, but she does not have any team sports. So I'm gambling on us. You know what I'm saying? And I'm confident in that. But we haven't been compelled to throw her in anything team sports because she, quote unquote, needs that experience. And not gymnastics either.
I'd like to address that particular key because, like we said in the previous episode, we were put into team sports because of the narrative that it helps you work with a team, right? You have to work together. Yeah. And that is true, but it didn't apply to me particular. There's a little bit of an ego in there for sure. Yeah. That I hopefully don't have as much anymore.
That's the dragon.
But it's also just because I was always put into a box when I played team sports. Because team sports are specialized. There's a specific role that you have to play. And even if you're rotating roles, everybody knows the quarterback is like the guy on the football team, right? Or the running back is the guy on the football team. Nobody's ever like, the lineman is the guy on the team, right?
There are a few, but you tend to align yourself with maybe your characteristics.
I can name a couple of quarterbacks. I can also name a couple of running backs. I can't name a lineman off the top of my head. And I'm like a sports coach. So I recognize somebody who's not even a sports coach who doesn't care about football definitely couldn't name those things. But
what about the bus?
They can name a quarterback.
I don't even know if there's a player that's the bus, but I'm assuming I just was yelling out big objects.
The train.
Yeah, what about the train, bro? You know about the bus and the train and the other modes of transportation that would be really large.
So where I'm going with that though is that Outrun PE is gonna enable us to have cooperative, collaborative team activities that don't box you into a specific role when you play. There may be rules and stipulations, but it's gonna fill the hole of like, my kid needs to learn to work with a team and communicate effectively. That, honestly, you can't communicate in the middle of a play.
You're standing on stuff. No, I'm just saying, like, there's a lot. That may be an advantage, because a lot of what we do, even though sometimes we will say, but you cannot use your voices, we'll ask people to use signals or come up with ways of like nonverbal communication to get something done, or be silent through their movement, which is very fun. But you can actually communicate. I think it's a little more in basketball, but you can actually say, hey, go over there. And that's fun, because I think we were talking about one of the experiments when kids first start out doing some of these games in parkour. They're just screaming at each other and falling off stuff, low level stuff, right? But they're just like so frustrated because they can't, when someone's blindfolded and being asked to move from A to B, and the other kids are trying to communicate how to get that kid to do it, and they can't see, they're saying go forward, but their forward is not the same forward.
Or they say turn left, but they mean their left and not Justin's left, right? Like our lefts are obviously opposite, so I have to say turn to your left. Or we have to establish at the start whether when I say left, I mean his left or my left. He's blindfolded, obviously his left. He can't tell where my left is, but
you see him switch right away. They'll be like, feel for the tape with your left hand, and then you hear like, oh, then they find the tape. Follow the tape forward. And now they have something, like they learn to use different language, and they look for what's most effective in the moment, and they talk about that.
And that's way more effective and translates better to an adulthood, an effective adult communicator than Blue 42 does.
Right, so try and explain to your grandmother how to use the iPhone from the phone.
Have you,
right?
you guys are that talk right there just reminding me of like every Survivor challenge on the show.
Oh,
you guys
really?
Watched a lot of Survivor?
No.
They have the blindfolded one where you have to direct people, and you guys watch some Survivor challenges for PE.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Because they have a lot. I mean, some of that stuff on there, you're just like, okay,
it's gimmicky.
Okay, but all of it is it's you're required to work with your team, and one thing I do like about these type of challenges, when you're comparing them to big sports, is that big sports always has like a versus element that's very aggressive. It's always like enemy, right?
Yes.
It's your team and the enemy team.
Us versus them.
And with football, it's like full on violence, right? Like it's like you have to smash this person, and oftentimes I had to hurt other people because I would get hurt. Otherwise, I let my team down if I couldn't beat this bigger person. So to have challenges where you're working together like that and you have a goal and you're not having to trample someone else to get to that goal, I think it's good too.
It's also better teamwork, right?
Yeah.
Like a good team can accomplish their objective without tearing down the opposing team, right?
Yeah.
Like in life, really, if you're working as a team, your goal is to make your team succeed, but it's not to kick the knees out from the other team. You're just like, hey, we just got there faster. We did it better. You guys did great too, but we got there first, right? That's true teamwork right there. Is can you be constructive and not destructive to the other team?
I felt the same way when I was in Cobra Kai. The coach is just like, sweep the leg.
You so look like the Cobra Kai too.
Johnny. What was it? Yeah, one of my bosses and buddies, Peck, used to call me Johnny. He'd be like, "Where's my Johnny at?"
Because he wanted you to sweep the legs.
Sweep the leg of the opposing company. Sweep the legs of the competition.
Business is a little different.
Yeah, it is.
Business, you can be cutthroat, but at the same time,
you go ahead. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, good business shouldn't be destructive to your opponent, to your competitors. You should just strive to be better.
Virtuous business.
There we go. Yeah, but it can definitely be sweep the leg.
I cast Untitled Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Yeah, no, that's messed up. So I did learn some of the team sports stuff from teams. So I think they're strong. They can be strong at that too. I just think that there's no one thing that's the answer for everything. And the broader the spectrum, the more generalist. And I think we're trying to do this broad spectrum generalist stuff. I mean, we've got parkour people who aren't obsessed with throwing and catching sports, teaching some throwing and catching. But that's more like, can we make sure that, elementary school kids don't just like stare at stuff as it like hurls towards them, right? And that they learn how to like toss it and the difference between under and overhand, right? Like stuff very basic like that. Because, Yeah, that one. Just like catch by turning away and holding your hands in front of you. Right. So we want to make sure we're solving for that, for sure. Man, that's good talk. I'm excited. I want to do it.
It actually, yeah, just talking about it makes me want to be a kid again and jump into it, because obviously it's right down my alley. But I think even the throwing and catching and a lot of the teamwork stuff were stuff that I missed and had to discover. Not only did I have to discover parkour and movement as a whole as an adult, but I also had to discover, for the most part, how to be an effective team communicator, listener, or leader, right? And I had to learn these like throwing and catching things as an adult, which is very embarrassing to suck at catching as an adult, right? But
I had friends.
Like, what was my nickname as a kid playing football with Dad in the yard?
No,
You can say it. You
can't
can say
remember
it. Just think about Ben Stiller in a particular movie where he's a model.
Yeah. Is
Dorklander?
Derek Zoolander?
There it is.
Dorklander, yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's pretty mean, huh? All fun and jest. In fact, I even
is
my
your
dad.
dad Biff from Back to the Future? Hey, Dorklander!
It certainly sounds like that, and definitely like off the top sounds pretty mean. It was always fun.
Yeah.
And meant in a loving and fun way. And even now I'll trip on the stairs and be like, nice one, Dorklander.
Oh,
Right?
gosh.
To myself. I never say it to other people.
Definitely
But-
Back to the Future.
It's very
It's
Back
totally,
to the
right?
Future.
Yeah.
But the reason for that is that like
Nobody
just catching,
calls
I was
me
just not good at catching.
Dorklander.
I was never good at catching because I never cared about the sports that involved catching.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, and I have friends who just played hockey, and like I'd be like, "Hey, throw this to me," and I'd just like toss it to them and then move like 10 feet away, and then they can't.
What do you mean?
They can't. Like, if you ever throw with your left hand and you're like, it just like doesn't work. It looks like a T-Rex batting at something, right?
Oh, because hockey
they don't throw.
They do really good about catching though.
So
They're
the Canadian
phenomenal.
kids, they can't throw.
But yeah,
The
so
Canadian kids
yeah,
are like, no, it's I can throw. I'll show you.
so there's just things like that I wish I could be a kid again and jump in there, because I think I would have enjoyed. I do now enjoy like throwing and catching. I think that's fun, right? And I enjoy like object manipulation games and like Floods and Babies. I enjoy jumping in and playing those games. But I think if I had been introduced earlier, I would have had a lot easier time developing those skills than having to come back and be like, whoa, this is a weakness that I need to address as an athlete. So I'm excited. I want to shrink myself into like a little Jesse, which is actually only a couple inches shorter than I am.
Right.
And then throw myself into that class.
Let's just put one of those
And
little,
just-
like little beanies with the helicopter on top.
I never
On
wore
you,
one of those.
and then just I'm saying put it on you now and just show up on the first day and see how long it takes
and see.
Olaf
And
to be
I-
like, hey, you're my boss.
Almost instant. I'll shave my facial hair.
Yes. No, it's just like,
And then
ah,
I'll have
and
to have
a
a
mask.
mask on.
and the
Ah,
mask.
there
The
you go.
mask will hide it.
And
Exactly.
then put on. Okay, maybe we'll try that.
I think that's fine. I think that's tough too. That so before we wrap up, right? Cullen has given us the hand sign. Well, he gave it to us like 15 minutes ago. Like, wrap it up. Like, I have been trying to train with the masks on, and it does. It's not. It's a different way of training. It's not the most. But you brought that mask thing up, and I was just like, man, like I've heard a lot of people that, you know, regardless, I don't want to get into the political stuff about masks. It just, the sword I will fall on is the right to move. This is not my battle. Masks. Oh my gosh. So I tried training with them on. And what I think is funny is that, you know, a year ago, if someone would put masks in a CrossFit workout, people would be like, oh man, like I did the entire workout with the mask on. Then I went home and ate dinner with the mask on. And then I RX'd it. Plus, now it's a hero wad because, you know, sleepy, dopey, whatever. And I slept through the entire night with the mask on to outdo each other with how strong they are and how much they can wear masks.
There's already those like resistance masks for running.
People
which
paid for those altitude
hunt
masks.
a lot.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, guys, like they
Don't work the same.
don't actually do much for you. You can do your own research, but I'm sure you'll
It's that
find
rigidity
upon
mindset of training, like
the suffer
the
mindset.
grit mindset, right?
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, so it's like if they used to sell these, and they still do, and people are training with them now, where they put the masks on. I'm doing the thing on my face. Is this the alien from Spiders,
Yeah,
or is
the
that Johnny?
he
There's
cuts
just
the
like,
face hugger.
why is he talking to me? Who is that stand up? Ronnie Chang. Yeah,
Chang.
Ronnie Chang's stand up. That's so great. And And they'll pay like $100 for these masks, and they're supposed to be like oxygen deprivation masks or high altitude training, which is not true because your red blood cells change when you move in altitude, not you aren't being suffocated with a fancy plastic bag, right? And people would pay for these and train with them, and everybody's like, oh man, that guy's he's such a badass. He's out there running with the mask on, looking like freaking Batman's villain or whatever, Bane, right? And people would be like, oh, they're tough and I can do it. And now people are like, they put a mask on and they fall over and feign like a shin kick in soccer or something like that. They're just like, oh, and they melt into the ground. I'm like, yeah, like no one wants to do it, but it's like I've been training with it on, and it does kind of suck. It's not, I mean, it's obviously not enjoyable, but I've been doing my cardio with it. I've been doing training parkour with it. All our coaches coach with them on, and that's just grit. It's just like in the future, we'll go back and be like, yep, we used to have to do all this with a mask on, and you guys are winded over here in the corner. Just, use it as a good story. I just wish people would take adversity that way and just own it and use it as a good story and stop complaining about it. Because I remember one of my first thoughts when I was some people on the podcast know that I went through cancer, but when I was 19, I was diagnosed with cancer. And honestly, and slightly egotistic, in an egotistic manner, and a little bit naive, I was like, oh, this is going to make a great story. No one will be able to complain to me about anything because I'll be like, well, I had cancer, right? So and I wasn't even thinking about losing that battle, but I was already making plans about, that'll be great. Now I have a reason to write a book, right? It's just like take those experiences and that adversity, overcome it, and then come back in the future and use it to either inspire people or challenge people or whatever, right? It's just how.
Keep it to yourself and just use it as fuel and be like, I've done harder things.
Right, exactly.
Sure.
We say this as we're in a podcast with no mask on, but could do the podcast with a mask on.
It would be very enjoyable.
Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, that's Outrun PE might also be plus mask. So.
Thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll catch you next time.
Yep.